Welcome to How to Reform DOD's Ppbe process. Please welcome our host, Federico Bartels, Senior Policy Analyst for Defense Budgeting at the Heritage Foundation.
Thank you. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and to today's event, How to Reform DOD's Ppbe process. My name is Fred Bartos, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst for Defense Budget here at the Center for National Defense, and I'll be your MC for this morning. Our program today will discuss how the Department of Defense decides to budget resources and what the problems and the possible solutions of the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process. A process known around town as Ppbe and intimately known by our panelists. Each of our panelists has worked in the process in different parts and in different perspectives, and thus will likely tackle the questions in different ways. The broader context for our conversation is that the Defense Authorization Bill for FY22 created a commission to reform Ppbe. The commission has had its commissioners named and should hold its first meeting soon, if not this past week, if they haven't held it already. The commission is set to brief Congress on its initial establishment activities during this summer, and then present an interim report by spring 23 and a final report by fall 23. So the bulk of the work lies ahead of them. My hope is that our panelists will bend the learning curve for the commission a little bit, or by a lot, I don't know. It depends on how well we do our job. First, let me introduce our three panelists. To my left, we have Dr. John Whitley. He last served as Acting Secretary of the United States Army. Before that, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Comptroller, and also served as the Acting Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, a CAPE, for a period of time. Interesting for today's conversation, Dr. Whitley served on the Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Commission. That's a mouthful. So he can speak a bit about how commissions do their work as well. To his left, we have Dr. Bill Greenwald. He's currently a visiting fellow at AEI and a co-founder of the Silicon Valley Defense Group. Dr. Greenwald has worked in industry, in Congress, and at the Department of Defense. One interesting note is that his doctorate dissertation focused on the impact of time in defense innovation, with a consideration of how the current system deals with innovation times and the access to the defense industrial base. To his left, we have Charlie Cook. He's currently with Deloitte, where he serves as a specialist executive in the area of national security. Charlie served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Financial Management and Comptroller, and as an Assistant Deputy Commander for Programs and Resources with the Marines. He has been involved with DOD financial management for his whole career, and one interesting note on his background is that he served in leadership positions at the American Society of Military Comptrollers, for the CDFMers who might be in the audience, like me. Now that we know a little bit about each other, my plan is to pepper this man with a few questions of my own for about 30 minutes or so, and then open up for questions from the audience, both who are joining us online and for a small audience here in the Allison Auditorium, for the real brave souls that came out here. So start submitting your questions online now, and we'll judge to see how crazy they are, so we'll pick the craziest ones. And by crazy, I mean the most in-depth ones. First, I would like to start with just a broad question to set the tone. What is one problem with Ppbe that the Commission needs to address to be considered a success? What would be like the MVP or the lowest passing grade?
Yep. Well, Fred, thank you very much, and thank you, Charlie and Bill. It's great to be here, and thanks everybody who's joining us. There's several, I think, key challenges with the Ppbe system, and I think my panelists will talk about others as well. So I'll start with one that was that I spent a lot of time dealing with my last time in government, and that is kind of the planning process, and in particular the lack of a strategic analytic framework to inform the planning process. The planning process is kind of one of the keys, particularly when you have a significant change in direction like we had in 2018 with the National Defense Strategy, moving from a 2-decade focus on counterterrorism, counterinsurgency warfare, to realign back to, in some ways, near-peer competitors like China and Russia. That has a lot of implications for the department. That has a lot of implications on capability requirements, on posture requirements, on force structure needs, et cetera. And it's really the planning phase where you translate that enduring strategy into how do you prioritize programs, how do you build budgets. And that process has atrophied over a number of years, and we're seeing the implications of that now. It's 4 years post-NDS, and there are a lot of key questions that we haven't answered to the level of rigor that we need to really be making progress on near-peer competitors. So I would say that would be one area where a lot of progress could be made if the Commission takes it on.
Yeah, I'd be, just to follow up on that, the need for speed and agility to compete against that near-peer competitor, and that near-peer competitor obviously is China. And the key thing we have to look at from designing any process is how it's going to work in that competitive field. And Ppbe, along with a lot of our other management processes, are well optimized to compete against an older competitor that we used to have, the Soviet Union. And that's fine with a competitor who is thinking in 5-year plans and thinking in linear fashion, thinking in a centralized management structure. And frankly, we have kind of adopted that type of a structure. The Chinese may not give us that benefit and may start thinking in a different way. And the way they're using civil-military fusion, something similar to what we tried to do in acquisition reform called civil-military integration, is critical. And so the test is, are new non-traditional companies able to innovate on behalf of the Department of Defense, and does the budget system, the resource allocation process prevent that? And right now, I would say that is the case.
Charlie?
I think where the biggest challenges lie for Ppbe reform, and the greatest opportunity, I should say, is with the execution side and accounting and reporting. Having watched the system over 40 years evolve, it used to just be Ppbe, and then they added E some 25 years ago. And I think, as we're finding with data analytics, artificial intelligence, all that sort of stuff, there is a ton of information that carries through the entire system. I mean, all the way from the beginning part, the program elements that CAPE uses, and there are decades and decades of information for weapon systems and whatnot. And it starts to break down really kind of in the transfer to programming phase, where they run into resource constraints, and then the budgeting phase where you get just the detail at the smallest level, and it starts to separate itself from the whole, if you will. But you go through execute accounting reporting, and there's just so much information available that does not come back into the beginning of the process to help inform, gee, we used to think this way, but the data actually shows us something else, to find ways to really, it's all about trade-offs. There's never enough money. And so how do you make the least bad decision of that day, if you will? Because it's always about managing risk. The whole enterprise risk management, I think, is the emerging approach to how we serve the nation and how we keep ourselves effective in defense.
Those are very good points, and there are a lot of threads that I want to pull. But before that, I have a question that is highly directed at Bill on what is Ppbe currently constructed and well suited for. Because you talked a little bit about the problems that you had and working on those 5-year cycle and implements. Is there any part of the system that can and should be preserved? I thought I would just start with you, since you seem to have the stronger opinion on that.
Yeah, I think anything that truly can be predicted is and I think that's something that the Commission is going to have to look at. There are certain things that, yeah, it doesn't really change a lot. Certain things that, if you are wrong in your predictions, it's not going to have grave national security implications. And I think that is the pot of money that you probably should put over there and address. The key issues are what is not predictive, and unfortunately, a lot of innovation is not predictive. What our adversary does is not predictive, and that's the areas where we have to kind of figure out how to worry about in-year execution, or how to address the changes in technology, and essentially how to basically be okay with a lot of failure in the innovation process, because that's what innovation is all about. You know, failing first and then ultimately succeeding.
Do you want to touch on what PPB is good for, John?
Oh, I'll touch on it as well. I think Bill made some very good points, and I'd just add to that. You know, I think one of the things, and the commission may wrestle with this and may be able to change names, may be able to change timing and sequencing and things like that. But I think the broad structure of you start with enduring strategy, and then you try to translate that into capability needs, force structure needs, posture needs. And then you try to translate that into programmatic priorities, and then you build out a budget to fund those programs. I suspect most of that will stay intact. And I think that stays intact for two reasons. One is it's a logical flow, and to Bill's point, you have to figure out what that's suited for and what that's not, et cetera. And so I think there'll be a lot of nuance in there. But I think a second reason why that stays is you think about senior leadership decision-making in the Department of Defense. And it's always easy for people outside the Department of Defense to say, well, make this decision, make that decision. Making decisions at the senior leadership levels of the Department of Defense is incredibly hard. You not only don't always know what the right answer is and what the consequences and the implications of a decision are, but you also have to deal with the competing interests and the competing challenges and stakeholder groups, both within and outside the department. And what breaking decisions up into pieces and saying, let's set a strategic direction, then let's let people mull over that for a little while and get some feedback, and let me take the pulse of the department and Congress and figure out where people are. And then translating that into another round of decisions, which are kind of more detailed and a little more specific, and then letting some analysis be done, letting people chew on that. I think that's one of the things that actually enables a secretary to make tough decisions. And so I suspect that's something that's going to stay.
And I might want to just put on the table that Ppbe is a system that gives great fidelity to congressional pork barreling. And frankly, we might as well get that on the table and basically say that, you know, you do get buy-in in that respect. Prediction is good if you want to ensure that money is flowing to your district or state. And that is an underpinning of the budget and keeping it moving forward, but it's also one of its most intractable problems if we want to actually get to some kind of flexibility and speed and agility.
I'm a little contrarian there on leading to congressional pork barreling, because I don't think people realize, well, how much pork barreling has the executive branch done in presenting the budget to Congress. So it permeates. But I'm going to steal Winston Churchill here for a minute. You know, Ppbe is the worst form of resource allocation, except for all the rest. I mean, it's there, it's hard. What I find frustrating, and having come up through the ranks, I've been, you know, ditch digger to finally, you know, foreman and all that sort of stuff because my knees ache and back doesn't work anymore. But it is, I think, the bones of structure of Ppbe are very, very strong. I mean, in fact, it's been around for, you know, 60 plus years, almost 70 years now. It is, the process itself, I think, gets abused from time to time. But we're designed like that. I mean, if the president decides I'm not making my budget decisions until after Christmas, well, that's going to roll down to OMB and it's going to roll down to Ppbe, and there's just a lot of chaos along the way. I mean, there's some chaos built in, just the pressurization of lack of enough resources to do everything you need to do. Inside, especially as an OSD comptroller, we used to joke about that. You know, they spend a year and a half, you know, fine-tuning the program. It's a beautiful ice sculpture, and then in the last 2 weeks we get these budget cuts from OMB or what reductions, or we don't get what we want, and we're coming with a sledgehammer. We just start whacking away at the beautiful ice structure that's going to, you know, save the world from itself. It's just a very difficult process to manage, and you know, as I touch on, it's confusing, and it takes a lot of leadership. It takes a lot of guts in the process, but there is a lot of grind to the process that I think needs to be addressed periodically, if you will. It gets chaotic and out of control.
To be a contrarian to a contrarian, I just would, you know, and I think the commission has to ask this question, is if the system is so good, why is it not be found anywhere else in the world? In other words, you know, do we see it in the private sector? Do we see it in the rest of civilian agencies? Why haven't they adopted it?
Yep.
Okay, and why hasn't a lot of countries out there adopted this wonderful process? Now, maybe the Department of Defense is a great organization. It has the best budget process in the world, but you would think someone else would try to take these concepts of program budgeting, linearity, predictability, and drive them into their process to achieve efficient resource allocation. And I just don't see it. And so I think the question is, why is it important? Question to
and
ask.
you've got to look at the product of the process as well. It's not just how you get it, but what are you getting at the end of it. On that note, since we started talking about the sledgehammer that is across the street from us, many of the proposed reforms require Congress to give up some of its oversight power and appropriate and authorize in different ways. What should congressional oversight look like? And are there any confidence-building measures that DOD should do to help change congressional oversight? We can start with Bill.
Well, I don't want to. I mean, transparency. In other words, there should be real-time transparency in data systems to the Congress, and I think that's and again, the commission is going to have to look and work its way through what type of transparency is necessary to achieve the proper oversight for congressional staff and the congressional members. In exchange for any pots of flexibility that they may recommend. And, there's always been this back and forth on information and information flow. And frankly, I think, better information flow and better, data that, everyone can access, and we're all on the same sheet of paper, I think it would be a great first start. And I know the department's tried to do that in the past, and it's never quite achieved that level of transparency in real-time data.
John, would you have been comfortable with real-time data transparency?
I think that's something the commission should look at. I don't know what the right answer is. I think that's something that the commission should definitely look at and weigh the pros and cons.
Charlie, any thoughts?
Yeah, as I've struggled with how to solve these things from my own perspective, one of the things is you have to respect how things are established. And one of them, just Congress's role. They have the power of the pen. And whatever reforms come forward, you have to respect that power that they have and their role and responsibility to do that. And sometimes we come with these brilliant ideas and they serve ourselves, but it violates an institutional prerogative that has been built into the Constitution, quite frankly. And so as this commission goes forward, where we'll succeed the most is it takes those challenges of where's the flexibility of the executive branch to respond to crises, but at the same time you don't take away prerogatives that are longstanding and institutionalized in law with the legislative branch. To me, that's part of this as it goes forward, and I think we all agree violently. This is a messy process, but there are certain foundational pillars that you have to consider those as you go forward to try and improve the process.
And I also think we have to, the commission has to look at who in Congress are we talking about, because Congress is, we always say Congress, but there's the different committees, different houses, there's staff, and there's members. And transparency of data, for example, knowing how much money is left on the table that you're eventually going to give up is something I think the members would like to see, because frankly, they have bled for these appropriations bills to actually give the department the ability to fund things in their district and states. And oh, by the way, we leave $20 billion or whatever on the table each year, and it just doesn't make any sense that data isn't flowing out there and that the Congress is acting to either recolor that money or make it more flexible or whatever, but instead it goes off and eventually is expired and eventually is canceled, and the department never sees that purchasing power.
You have two beautiful ice sculptures clashing against one another, because if you ask the Hill, they probably spent their whole year also crafting a beautiful ice sculpture, just the same way that the DOD has its own ice sculpture that it sends to the Hill. They get smashed. So I want to pull a thread that Charlie mentioned in the beginning of his initial remarks, because there is a lot of disconnection between the different parts of the process, how it goes from planning to programming, from execution review, connecting how execution review feeds back into the planning. What type of connective tissue should there be developed, and what is missing there? What should it look like? Is it just a matter of everyone working from the same type of data, or is it a matter of having better workflows? What's your impression? Let's start with you, Charlie.
Oh boy. As I think about it, just each phase has its own special function. And it's almost like your children. They're all different. You love them all equally. But managing them and getting the family to work together is often a difficult thing to do. And what I find, again, everything starts out, each phase, it's a dollar. And the dollar has not yet turned into an aircraft carrier or a Marine, sailor, soldier, or airman. But it's a dollar. It starts and it transforms into whatever it's supposed to do, and it comes out at the end and it's a dollar, and you need to bring it back in. But there's all these different phases. And what I find, by the time you get to accounting and reporting, everything is turned into a debit and a credit. It's mind-numbing, and I wouldn't want the CNO, Chief of Staff of the Army, whoever, to turn into a CPA to understand the data. But there is in that data information that tells you about readiness. It's whether I have too much stock, not enough ammunition, whatever it is, that points to indicators towards where risk lies in the institution. And so some of it's a language thing. They start speaking Latin in the beginning, and by the time we get over to the end, it's a completely different language. And we haven't found the ability to interpret that back. And so it's relevant. Not so much to a planner, I mean, because that's very. I don't want to denigrate and say it's conceptual, but they're dealing with world events and what may happen. But as it goes to the programmers and the budgeteers and to the accountants down the line, it loses its ability to communicate back. We have to figure out how to do that, to bring it forward and make it relevant to do that.
I'd add to Charlie. Charlie says it's a language thing. I've always been struck. Program evaluation is a word that to the vast majority of the public policy community means retrospective analysis of realized performance data. In DOD, it means a forward-looking simulation model of a future warfight. So it is a language thing, and I agree with everything Charlie said. I had started with one of the big transitions, the ability to transition from strategy to programming, and that's basically not happening right now, and that's a big, serious challenge. And then I think Charlie hit the second big one, which is this ability to feed back data. I have an example that I use. I can use CAPE examples because I'm a CAPester myself, and so their feelings won't be hurt if I pick on them. We were the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and we had to make some really big programmatic decisions. One of them was about basic training, and do we shut down basic training for an extended period of time or not? You're bringing people from all over the country together. You're putting them in close confinement. This is just a mess waiting to happen. But at the same time, we didn't know what was going to happen, right? Were our enemies going to opportunistically use the COVID pandemic to cause problems? We couldn't take the readiness risk. So we had to think about that. That was a tough problem. And so CAPE got asked to do some analysis. What would be the impacts if we shut down basic training? And the program evaluation part of CAPE did what the program evaluation part. They built a simulation model consistent with the public health simulation models that were going on, that were being used at the time. Did an excellent job. I mean, very quantitatively rigorous. They applied the mathematics exactly correctly. And they came out and said an outbreak in basic training would be catastrophic. We'd had thousands of cases, significant hospitalization, and even a non-trivial amount of death. The problem with all that? We'd had 2 outbreaks in basic training already. Both had been stopped at 40 cases. Simulation analysis was completely disconnected to reality on the ground. I think that's Charlie's point, and that's a big problem in the Ppbe system. I think we need more statisticians, econometricians in the key analytic offices. I think OD&I don't know if this is the right answer or not, something the commission should look at. OD&I has a formal retrospective program evaluation process that feeds back in. I don't know if that's the right answer or not, but that should be looked at. It's a big problem.
Yeah, I think the type of data, that's incredibly important. The type of data that you're looking at, it can inform decision-making, but you have to remember, it's not going to predict. If you continuously rely on things to be predictive, it's just not going to work out. And even cost estimation. I mean, cost estimation is there's so many good cost estimators. We've got a pretty good idea of how things are going. But where did our cost estimators fail in the past? Something like SpaceX, all right? The cost estimators basically took SpaceX and estimated, it was going to cost 10 times what SpaceX delivered it for. Okay, that's not, because if you're thinking that whatever SpaceX is going to do, or the non-traditionals of the future are going to deliver capability, and you're off by 10 times, that's a problem. Now, they did, to their credit, they did estimate what it would cost if they operated under commercial capability, but they were still many, many times over what the actual thing is. So data is important, but we don't always have the data. We have to make decisions based on what we have, and that's actually hard. You'd have to take a risk.
And if you're actually doing something new, you're not going to have the past performance to baseline your data against.
Exactly.
And before we open up to questions from the audience, or one question on Bill's favorite topic, speed. And I know that there are many areas where the process can be sped up or even have like reduced elements to it that are redundant. Where do you see the main challenges when it comes to speed? Is it a matter of just Congress appropriating faster, or is it a matter of taking away instead of the programmers having, 6 months, they have 2 months? Where would you go first for it? And I'll leave Bill last this time.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Bill's the expert here, so feel free to correct me when we get there. I think acquisition reform, I think, was outstanding. I think, and then its implementation under Ellen Lord and David Norquist, I think, was outstanding. Ppbe reform, I think that's, a great and important topic. But what I would say to both of those is they are enablers. Neither one of them by themselves speeds our adoption of technologies. They can enable it. They can allow us to do other things differently to enable it, but they don't do it by themselves. So what do you have to do to actually speed our adoption of technology? I think we have to change our business practices in a lot of key areas. I think as a service purchasing. So rather than design, build, own, and operate, and be locked into one technology for 30 years, I think we rent it. And there's other renters in that market, and they're refreshing that technology in real time. And by the way, we've just moved an acquisition from RDT&E and procurement to O&M. Mm-hmm. And we're able to get what we need at a particular time, and we're able to keep pace. You can't do that everywhere. Yeah. A second would be digital transformation. The idea of I'm going to move more of the upstream processes of the product development lifecycle into the digital sphere. I'm going to think about digital simulation models that allow me to run more iterations faster and less time. Gives me the ability to more customize the product to the needs of the customer, to the needs of the department quicker. And then I can follow that with a digital thread through to digital manufacturing, robotic, additive manufacturing, robotic manufacturing, et cetera. So I think we've got to change our business processes. 2 examples would be as a service, purchasing, and digital transformation.
Carl?
Yeah, I took that question from a process standpoint, not so much as John's of how do you get innovation out there into the hands of people. And for me, and this is kind of drawing on my accounting experience and trying to become auditable and all that sort of stuff, the things I find fascinating in the business process, and I guess it can spill over to PPBE, is 2 basic concepts inside the military are all present or accounted for, and good order and discipline. And that does not exist in our business world. It's astounding that you can send a serviceman into battle and strong command and control, and they all know what to do, and they interact. You get to the business world, and I'm sure, Bill, you see that in acquisition more than anything else, it's chaos out there. It's a wild, wild west. I think, to some extent, just putting a little more discipline to respect the process and where you are in it. There will always be variations, But I've seen the example I've seen that to me is most memorable is early on in OEF, OIF, it was really OIF, the whole issue with explosively formed projectiles that were just shredding our ground vehicles and stuff like that. Within 2 weeks, we had hundreds of $1 millions on a reprogramming action to the Hill, and they acted within 2 weeks. And the consortium, how they all came together to, I think it was 9 companies, to jointly build the MRAP vehicles to prevent all that. So the system, while it doesn't often behave nimbly, it can do that. So I think part of it is looking at what's in there and honor it periodically to do that, because it can provide. Now, to John's point about it going to as a service, what I think would be a challenge there is because of the appropriate structure out there is you have your procurement accounts for aircraft and shipbuilding and military construction, all that sort of stuff. And the way you read the appropriations language, and O&M is almost an oh, by the way. It's if it's not funded somewhere else, put it into the trash can here and pick stuff out. As a service comes more and more, you'll see the O&M accounts grow, and so it becomes more gray and obscure what's actually going on behind all that. And I think that's, I think for the Hill, that would be a structural challenge of, well, how do I know all the resources we're appropriating are going in the right way or authorizing?
So just to comment on that, I think yeah, buying things as a service, buying things, renting, leasing, and so on. But you also remember we also have some budgetary rules that prevent doing that, and those are hopefully things that the Commission can be looking at as far as budgetary scoring and the ability to incentivize and look at how things are being innovated. I mean, just even cloud right now, is buying as a service, and it would be a hard thing to get through at some time, and I'm glad we finally figured it out. The key thing is the way processes are in time. The crimes process is a 2 to 3 year process. The budget process is a 2 to 3 year process. The contracting process, if you're buying something over $25 million, is about a 22-year process. And of course, the 5,000 acquisition process can go on for 25 years. And so the key thing to try to figure out if you're going to innovate fast is how can you create easy pass lanes around those processes. In MTA, middle tier acquisition, we tried to do that in the requirements process and the 5,000 process and force things in the 5-year period. Probably what you're looking at in each innovation phase is a transition fund of some sort between early S&T to early experimentation and prototyping, to a large-scale operational prototyping and actually to production. Every one of those, there are like 4 or 5 different valleys of death out there, and every one of them has to kind of hold on unless you can plan perfectly and get it into the process is a problem. And so therefore you need some kind of flexible way to make those valley of death transitions. And that's more than likely a flexible pot of money.
Or different colors of money. So we'll go to questions from the audience now. Should we start with online ones? Go ahead, Tom. You look ready.
We got some good ones coming in. I encourage our audience to keep sending them. The first one is from George Kovach. And George, Bill, gets to a question you were just talking about, and that is, if the problem of the Ppbe Commission is to actually bridge this valley of death, is that more of an acquisition problem than it is a Ppbe problem? And should the Ppbe Commission be empowered to look over in the FAR and the 5000 series and fix things that they can see are just right over the next terrain feature, if that makes sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And the reason why we should be focusing more on Ppbe now is because the department has the tools now to essentially, it has the easy pass lane in contracting and acquisition. And the 2 biggest tools are other transactions, which essentially allow a business relationship to be established outside of the FAR. And therefore, it just depends on how creative the Department of Defense is in doing that. And you can get those type of transactions on contract in an incredibly fast period of time. Or, if the department chooses to, it can be just as bad as the FAR. So, that's their option. Then they also have middle tier acquisition. Again, a way of forcing the department to deploy something operationally capable or something like NRAP, rapidly fieldable, in a 3 to 5 year time frame. It also has rapid acquisition authorities for 0 to 2 years. So the acquisition point, if they really want to go fast, is is there. The issue is, do they have the money to actually start it? And we've seen in middle tier, you have to wait 3 years to get a middle tier going. So now you're an 8-year process, not a 5-year process.
James McCarthy from Cyprus asks, he brings up this point about Ppbe. If we want it to go faster, does that mean we have to sacrifice some degree of decision quality? Right now, Ppbe has a ponderous amount of data but if there's somebody saying, no, you need to go faster services, you can only develop your program for 2 months, and OSD, you can only have a month with it, is that going to necessarily lead to less quality decisions?
Well, I would just say, that's part of the trade space, and Bill talked about the trade space, and Charlie talked about the trade space. We've been pushing acquisition to take more risk and to try and accept more failures. They're reluctant to do so because they know the consequences of that down the road. So that's what the commission needs to try to figure out. If we go too far and we have a series of failures, Congress will go back the other way. What the balance is what the commission has to wrestle with and what the department wrestles with every day.
First of all, I'd say, Jim McCarthy, that's an unfair question because you're an insider. You look at it historically, it used to be reprogramming actions went to the Hill all the time. I mean, they were singular transactions, and the Hill complained. And I want to say it was under Sean O'Keefe's reign in the early 90s, late 80s, that they agreed, okay, we'll do a monthly reprogramming transaction. And that became too hard. And then you went to the omnibus where it just gathers it all up. And in June, you send over this 100-page document. And it is confusing, it's hard, and because remember, interest items, they'll take off some of the sources. They'll approve all the pluses, take off some of the sources. And of course, that drags on until September 27th, September 28th. And it is just hard on the people inside the Pentagon. You're going to get this list. First, it's going to be imbalanced. You're going to get $1 billion approved, and only $500 million of sources. So then they have to sit down and figure out, okay, what's most important to the Air Force versus defense medical versus that and the other thing, and they parse it all out. And so how it ends up, it's ice sculpture again. It's disfigured as to what the intent was and the needs you're addressing, because this late in the year, now you're shopping around, what can I execute in the last 2 weeks of the fiscal year, which may not be the highest priority. So, challenge.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'm J.V. Venable with the Heritage Foundation, and I loved your discussion on analysis, predictive analysis, and the likes. Leaders have a hard time bucking trends, bucking the idea of consensus, and then when you present them with tons and tons of data and then analysis on top of that, it becomes very challenging for them to go in an opposite direction. John, I'm interested in your thought process, particularly as the director of CAPE and maybe someone who's going to be sitting at the helm of a large organization in DOD one of these days. What are your thoughts on predictive analysis? You use the example of the catastrophic nature of COVID, the impact that could have on basic training, and yet it didn't. I mean, ultimately it didn't. Could you talk about that and how you might be able to buck that trend of in spite of all of the data, I'm going to go in a different direction?
Yeah, so a couple things. First, I was blessed when I was the director of CAPE to have a secretary and a deputy secretary who were very quantitatively astute. So first off, there's a personality issue, right? How does a leader receive information? And you just have to make sure you're able to package and present the information in the way that they're ready to receive it. The second thing, so that's just the mechanics and the frictions of how you do the job on a day-to-day basis. The second part, though, is you have to recognize that analysis, and particularly the types of analysis that a CAPE or any other type of organization in the Department of Defense do, is only one contributor to the decision. And we analysts, I'm an analyst by background, we like to think that we own all enlightenment and truth, and that our models give us the definitive answer. And the truth obviously is not that. The world is incredibly complex. A model, by definition, abstracts from that complexity and isolates a specific pathway of cause and events effects, to model those out and to understand what they are. When you go and then present to the Secretary, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, they're saying, well, that's great. Now I understand that isolated pathway, and there's about 10,000 additional pathways that could play out in the world, and I have to take into account all of them. So I have to think about what my forces that you're recommending for this problem, how would they play in a different situation? How would they play in a different threat environment? How might it play out if the world goes differently than what your model assumed? So, really, it is understanding that analysis is a vitally important tool, but it is only a tool and one contributor among other things to a decision.
Let me add on kind of a philosophical debate I think that we probably need to start looking at, and that's the difference between the success of operations research in World War I with the Brits and World War II with the United States, and how these were near-term problems that we needed data and we could make decisions on that, and how that translated in the 50s and 60s to systems analysis and systems research and so on, to try to predict things that frankly couldn't be predicted. And that whole intellectual mind space is problematic. And Ppbe is based on systems analysis. And Ppbe is based on this linear predictive on reliance on data. And so let's look in today's world. Today's world, innovation is coming from way outside where the defense industry. And we have CAPE, who is wonderful at what they do. But NDIA just did a really good report, and in there, if you read through that, is that CAPE, because it doesn't have data on how new Silicon Valley or new non-traditional companies create and innovate, it can't make decisions on that. So therefore, it discriminates against that type of innovation. Exactly the type of innovation that Chinese are now trying to bring into their systems. That's a real problem, and a real problem with data, and a real problem with the way our organizations look at data.
Any thoughts, Charlie?
I think they covered it.
Okay, perfect.
That's fine.
Do you have okay.
One?
Okay,
I
go
like
ahead.
this one. It's from Mark Solomons in DOD. He says, okay, got it all. So how do you recommend we reform the Ppbe process? So I guess I'd be saying, what would be one thing that one of your panelists would say should change?
I'll lead off. I think we actually hit it quite well here, right? I think the lack of strategic analysis to inform the planning process, the speed and agility of acquisition, and our ability to adopt technology and field technology at the speed of relevance, and our problems in execution with bringing back realized performance data to inform upstream decisions. I think those are the three biggest problems by far.
And maybe just a greater look at mission and other portfolio accounts, therefore, that create more flexibility within those mission or portfolios.
Perfect. And I'll take the moderator's prerogative to ask one last question, which should be a very simple one. Suppose that we are at the Christmas 23, and you see the work of the commission, and you think that that is completely off track. What would you say was the reason that made the commission derail the work of the commission?
I would say that one, they weren't bold enough in their large-scale strategic thinking, but then they weren't tactical and actually went down and wrote the actionable changes that are necessary in law, regulation, and policy.
I would echo that. I would think lack of energy to push it through. It'd be very hard to do that because it will take a lot to change the system. I go back to Peter Levine's article on why DOD reform is so hard. He had 10 great reasons why. It's a big system. It's a huge institution. And if you're going to change it, it's going to take a lot of energy and focus to do that.
And I think George Kovach's question highlighted one thread within the commission, the difference of point of view and definition of the problem from the acquisition community versus the resource allocation community. So I think the combination on the commission of folks from both communities is a great potential strength. And if they do exactly what Bill just said, dig into the details and understand the details, I think they can make a lot of progress. If they don't come together like that and it becomes parochial and about the acquisition community getting more resources, I think it would has the potential to not be as helpful as it could be.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all the panelists for joining me, and thanks for the audience to joining me in this conversation. Thank all the questions that were sent over. I think that this is a very important issue, and the infrastructure behind how we make decisions in DOD will dictate how the military either stumbles along or thrives in an era of great power competition. You can read more about the issue at heritage.org, and if you have any questions or just want to talk more about it, please reach out. My contact information is available at heritage.org. Thank you for listening, and thanks for all your questions.